So our program today is entitled CIA Paramilitary Operations in Afghanistan. I spent the last 3 years of my military career at CIA and came to realize what a unique capability CIA brings to our nation and what extraordinary men and women we have in the agency who often operate without the top cover we provide for our men and women of uniform. While CIA and DoD often operate in the same battle space, they do so under different authorities and bring different capabilities to the field, and I have come to firmly believe that we are our best when we leverage the unique strengths of each and don't try to duplicate each other's capabilities. And our speakers tonight will talk about that. Tonight we do have two speakers who are uniquely qualified to discuss our topic. First is Rod Smith. Rod was one of my many mentors at CIA. He was chief of the Special Activities Division, where he was responsible for recruiting, organizing, and equipping, and making available trained paramilitary forces and carrying out foreign intelligence collection and covert and direct action missions as directed. Prior to joining the CIA in 1986, he served as an enlisted artilleryman with the 1st Marine Division of Vietnam, and later spent 11 years as a federal prosecutor. I'll also mention he has a connection with the local area. He's the great-great-great-grandson of Colin McKinney, who was, of course, for whom is named Collin County and the town of McKinney. We took a spin up to Van Alstyne today to look at the McKinney grave site, and he later met with the mayor and did a few pictures there. So he has, again, a tight connection with the local community. Our other speaker is J.R. Seeger. J.R. Seeger is a legend in the CIA, has been an archaeologist, a paratrooper, and a CIA case officer. After 9/11, he led Alpha Team, one of the first CIA teams into Afghanistan in the fall of 2001. He's also the author of the Mike 4 novel series based on his experiences, and I've read the beginning of the first one, and I highly recommend it if you want an authentic look at what field operations are. So tonight we will have initial opening remarks from the speakers. Rod will go first, followed by J.R., and then I'll come back to the stage and moderate the Q&A. Again, at any time you can email your questions, and I'll have those teed up. So, Rod, your stage.
I want to thank you all for your hospitality, which I've enjoyed ever since I've been here. And it was a pleasure to meet your city manager and your mayor today, and finally get to the city. Where's my great-great-great-grandfather's name?
Sir, we can't hear you. Just get closer to the microphone.
How's this? All right. I was just thanking you for all the hospitality J.R. and I have seen since we arrived yesterday. And it's been a real pleasure, and I've wanted, for as long as I've known who Colin McKinney was, to visit the town named after my great-great-great-grandfather. I know we're short on time, so I'm going to move as quickly as I can. I want to begin with two caveats. First, I retired 20 years ago. And so what I say tonight is based on my experience and my time. And I want to make it clear that the paramilitary capabilities, which came under my division from 1999 to 2003, have grown significantly, both in size and in the respect of their peers. They deserve that. They've earned it. And secondly, second caveat is the Presentation Review Committee at my home, which is my wife, told me this has too much history in it. And I said, well, she said, they want anecdotes and humor. I said, I think this group will have an appetite for humor, for history. I've been told you do, and I hope that's true, because if I have to go home and tell her she was right, there'll be no living with her. So I'm going to give you the title of this presentation is Paramilitary Operations and Afghanistan. And I'm going to take the liberty of making sure that that's not just paramilitary operations in Afghanistan. You're going to hear about that for sure. But I'm going to tell you something about the history and culture and traditions that led up to our time in Afghanistan, because it's, for veterans of our organization, it's important when we get the chance to educate people about who we are, the agency, and where we came from. We take it. I take it anyway. So, JR, who is a friend of mine of 30 years, has a dynamite presentation. He was there. It's exciting. It's informative. And he has color slides. And he's really the dessert portion of this. But first, you have to eat your vegetables, and that's me. So let's get started with this. First, it helps to look at our national culture. We are an honest country. We value honesty. We expect it and we admire it. Honesty is the best policy is something we all are raised with. And so we are, as Americans, are not comfortable, generally speaking, with the deception necessary in the conduct of a secret intelligence service. To many of us, secrecy equals treachery. And words like espionage and sabotage and subversion are, in the American vocabulary, dirty words to many people, although they are, in the right circumstances, very noble pursuits. And going through some of the history you're going to hear now, I hope will help put in context what you hear JR tell you about his experience in Afghanistan. So, as evidence of our national character, in 1929, the Secretary of State, Henry Stimson, upon taking office, discovered that the State Department had a little outfit called the Black Chamber that was a leftover from World War I. And its job was to intercept and decode foreign diplomatic traffic. And when Stimson discovered that, he was appalled. He immediately abolished it, and he said famously, "Gentlemen, do not open each other's mail." Well, that general attitude prevailed until 1941, when our innocent blindness cost us at Pearl Harbor. And immediately after Pearl Harbor, FDR turned to a close confidant, William J. Donovan, who was a Medal of Honor recipient in the First World War, a very successful New York lawyer, called back to service in World War II. But even before he came back into service, FDR had trusted him to travel in Europe and keep the president advised of activities, first-hand observations of activities in Germany, in the UK, and other places. And certainly, Wild Bill Donovan, as he came to be called, knew that war was coming, as did FDR. And one of the things that Donovan had seen in the UK was an entity called Special Operations Executive. People trained to go behind enemy lines and commit espionage, spying, and sabotage. That's affirmative acts, blow up a bridge, organize a partisan group, and so on. FDR didn't take much persuasion, and very shortly, an American counterpart organization called the Office of Strategic Services was formed, and it was spies and saboteurs, intended to go behind enemy lines and commit acts of espionage and subversion and so on. And they served with distinction for the duration of the Second World War, but they were a creature of that war, and they were specifically and officially described as only to exist in time of war. When the war ended, OSS was dissolved almost immediately. But the one legacy that they left was to prove the efficiency and value of spies and saboteurs. That's two different disciplines. And this is going to become more important as I go along in the next few minutes. The importance of spies and saboteurs able to go behind enemy lines and willing to go behind enemy lines and do what needed to be done. Even though OSS was just dissolved, Truman already knew before the end of hostilities that America was about to enter a new conflict, a global conflict against an implacable Soviet foe, and that spies and saboteurs were going to be even more important in that conflict, which, as far as he could see, had no end, than they had been in the Second World War. So, after some Washington toing and froing, there was some opposition to the idea. A lot of people still didn't like the idea of a central intelligence capability. They had seen what the Germans and the Russians could do with a secret police, and they didn't want that, of course. J. Edgar Hoover didn't want it, didn't want any competition in that realm. But in the end, Congress did the right thing and passed the National Security Act of 1947, which created the Central Intelligence Agency. It also recognized another organization that had proven its worth in combat, and that was the United States Air Force, in the same bill. Passed in July 26, 1947, and the anniversary was celebrated 2 days ago. From the start, the legislative charter of the Central Intelligence Agency, with regard to its operations abroad, specified that the agency could collect and would collect foreign intelligence. That means go overseas, recruit assets, and collect vital information secretly that was of vital importance to the executive decision-making process. At the same time, Congress said that the President, and remember this is, I want, if you don't take anything else away from my remarks, I hope you will remember this. Congress said from the start, and this never changed, the President, and only the President, could direct action necessary to support identifiable foreign policy objectives important to U.S. national security in the political, economic, and military realms. What made these actions covert, and I'm going to refer to covert action for the rest of my time up here, what made them covert was that the United States government's hand was to be concealed or plausible deniability maintained. It had to happen, but we couldn't be associated with it. And that's a tough job, because you've made something happen. A lot of people notice it, but they can't know who did it, or they have to think somebody else did it. And that was our legacy from the OSS. We were very much modeled on their experience. And that two-discipline entity survived and persisted through all of its encounters with reality, through its rather vigorous encounters with congressional oversight, which the high water mark was in the mid-'70s, when both the Senate and House committee, alarmed by reports that excesses had been committed through the national security community, took the wire brush to not only CIA, but the FBI and IRS. But we survived that experience and came out of it with our two-part model, foreign intelligence collection and covert action, intact, and continued to march. And in addition, we got the Executive Order 12333 in 1981, which restated that mission and made our authorities and limits clear. And that's terribly important, because for an agency that's regarded by most people who don't have experience with us as dangerously secret and treacherous or inclined to recklessness, we always knew that it was vitally important that we understood our authorities and stayed within them. Director of Central Intelligence, for whom I have a great deal of respect, George Tenet, who served 7 years in that job, said, covert action is by far the smallest part of CIA's major functions, but it presents the greatest risk of controversy. And that's true. If it's done badly, if it's based on poor planning or poor execution, and it blows up in our face publicly, it is a terrible, more than an embarrassment. It is a major setback and a stain on our honor and our ability. The Bay of Pigs was an example of that. It was terribly planned, and it didn't have a chance from the start. That was 1961. We also suffered from just having been in the neighborhood of events that were beyond our control, or at least not in our intent. We were in support, for example, of a replacement for Patrice Lumumba in the Congo in 1961, because he had leaned hard into Moscow. And this conflict that Harry Truman saw from the start between us and the Soviets around the world, the whole world was a battlefield. And every one of the instances that I could name historically involved Soviet hand, our hand, and a struggle wherever it was. And Lumumba had leaned hard into the Soviet hand. We were encouraging the Congolese to replace him, but we did not encourage them to murder him, which the Congolese did, and it was not within our control or at our direction. But we were in the neighborhood, so there are still people who believe that we had a hand in it. And that's true of several other cases. Nevertheless, despite the risk of controversy and despite the difficulty of carrying out these actions, no president from Truman forward, that is, no president since our creation, has failed to find our covert action capability necessary at some point in his term. Every single president. I was a foreign intelligence collector. I lived in the big part of the operational part of the CIA that sends people abroad to do things is called the Directorate of Operations, and the greatest part of that are the foreign intelligence collectors, and that's understandable because we go around the world, collect intelligence vital to this country 24/7 and every point of the compass. The covert action side, on the other hand, had officers who, it included our paramilitary forces, which we're going to focus on here from this point forward. These officers had very, very respectable military experience, in some cases tremendously respectable. We were able to recruit them and bring them in as paramilitary officers. In other cases, we took younger officers who had very commendable military, and hopefully later on as the DOD got its feet on the ground in special operations, we could take people out of, where they were ready to leave special operations, and had the necessary traits and attributes to become be trained as a foreign intelligence collector, and so they embodied both disciplines in a single officer, and that was the classic paramilitary officer in the CIA. Actually, both kinds, but the ones that really had a unique set of two skill sets were in many cases most remarkable. In fact, so much so that when they went to the basic training for case officers, their instructors were case officers from other divisions in the foreign intelligence field, and those instructors saw their talents and their skills and began trying to poach them. They'd say, listen, you're a really talented person. Why do you want to go over to that paramilitary outfit? It's a backwater, you know. They just sit and clean their rifles and jump out of planes and wait for the phone to ring. Come on over to my division and we'll have you in the field collecting vital secrets right away. And it happened often enough that I had to go down to the training facility and see the director of training, who was a colleague and a friend. And I told him, stop it. Tell your instructor to stop poaching my officers, because it takes us a long time to find the right guys and to recruit them and get them in the pipe. And I don't want to see them siphoned off. Don't do that, because I need them badly. And when the balloon goes up next time, I'm really going to need them. I don't want to be facetious about it, but I can't help this image. The foreign intelligence side of the house dominated. It was the dominant culture. It dominated the budget. It was the bright and shining piece. It delivered vital secrets daily to the president and others. We were a little trailer park on the edge of town. But from that little trailer park came, by the time I left in 2004, we have a star engraved on the west wall of the headquarters lobby for each officer who's fallen in the line of duty. Just about half of those stars came out of my little trailer park. It's a dangerous job. And the FI guys often called my case officers knuckle draggers, not as a reflection of their abilities, but because they went to tough places where there was very often the sound of gunfire. And I saw them in Bosnia. As I was involved in Balkan operations as an FI guy. Now, I saw our paramilitary people there, and I was knocked out. by their skills and by their courage and their talents. And I resolved if I ever had a chance to be associated with them again, or in the future, I'd take it. And that opportunity came in 1999 when I was just finishing a tour as chief of another division, and the job was Chief Special Activities Division, which housed paramilitary as well as other covert action skills, came open. And I went to the boss of all operations, the DDO, and I said, Jim, this job's coming open, I'd like to put my name in the hat. And he said, you want that job? He was an FI guy, dyed in the wool. European capitals, embassy reception, had little pocket square. He said, you can have it, but I don't know why you want it. We're never going to need those paramilitary guys again. You know, they're a relic. I said, well, I didn't say, well, sir, I disagree with you, because that's not career enhancing. I just said, well, I'd like to give it a try. And so I got the job in 1999. And for the 4 years that I was in it, a lot of things happened. You're going to hear about one of the most dramatic in just a minute. But overall, the thing that I had to do day in and day out, this is not nearly as exciting as JR's slides, but I had to fight for our budget in an era, in an atmosphere of budgetary competition. I had to make the case that our skills were going to be needed, that they had to be maintained, they had to be enhanced as much as we could, and stop trying to steal my money. And for the most part, I was successful, and that paid some dividends in Afghanistan. I mentioned earlier that I wanted you to remember that presidential authorization in the form of what's called a finding is necessary for our covert action capabilities to be employed in the field. The reason for that is our literature, our publications, our movies are all peppered with the idea that the CIA is some kind of rogue elephant that just wanders around out there in the jungle and thinks up these things on its own and goes charging off and does them. That's absolutely not true. Just this month, I think, a book called The Lumumba Plot, and once more, the Congo in '61, the author says that Lumumba's leaning into Moscow's arms set off alarm bells in the CIA. I want you to know that's not true. There are no alarm bells at the CIA. We are the alarm bells. We go off in the interest of the executive. If there's trouble in the world, it's us who are charged to let people know, to the best of our abilities, exactly what's happening. All right, that's history, and the past is prologue. This is prologue to what JR is going to tell you here in just a minute. But I want to turn to Afghanistan and set the stage for how we got there. And I'm sure there are many people in this room who remember this personally. The Soviets invaded in 1979. They waged a brutal campaign, and the Afghans suffered in large part because of the Russians' reliance on aircraft, attack helicopters and transport aircraft. We, in turn, were charged, the agency, were charged with conducting a covert action campaign to support and arm the Afghans who were fighting the Russians. And in that program, by 1986, it was clear that something had to be done about the Soviet use of air power. And what was done was the issuance of Stinger anti-aircraft missiles to the Afghans. They're very effective, they're durable, they're relatively simple, and they were lethal against low-flying Mi-8s and transport aircraft. Such that, I'm not going to give the credit all to the Stinger program, but to a large extent, after they were issued in '86, the Russians folded up their tents and went home in 1989. Before they did, they established a puppet government to govern from Kabul. Even before the Soviets left in '89, in 1988, we began a program from the Foreign Intelligence side of the House to monitor what was happening in Afghanistan, because when the Russians left in '89, most of the world, most of the United States government walked away. I mean, there was this little landlocked country, dusty, down in South Asia. What was going to happen? The war was over. Well, somebody needed to tell our government, our decision makers, what was happening in Afghanistan. And that began in 1988 in anticipation of the Soviet withdrawal. And it continued right along. JR was part of it. And what we followed was the puppet government didn't last but 2 years. Then Afghanistan, being Afghanistan, it collapsed into multi-faction civil conflict, from which emerged a dominant faction called the Taliban, the students, in 1994. By 1996, they had seized Kabul and begun a de facto governance of most of Afghanistan, and the main opposition in the form of the Northern Alliance, which was made up of Northerners, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Turkmens, did go north and take up refuge in the Panjshir Valley in the northeast corner of Afghanistan, which was an impregnable redoubt. Neither the Russians nor the Taliban were ever able to go into it. It's one long ambush site. And so I want you to understand that, because this is a great, and in my experience, the best example of the FI side of the house and the covert action side of the house coming together, because the FI collection from '88 to 1999 was thorough, but it was foreign intelligence collection. We weren't in there fighting. But in 1996, when the Taliban took Kabul, something else happened. Sudan, which had been giving refuge to a man named Osama bin Laden and his followers, had had enough, and they booted him out. The Taliban, who had just taken over in Afghanistan, opened the doors and welcomed him in. And our foreign intelligence collection effort was able to tell our government what was going on with these, the Arab followers of bin Laden, in establishing training camps, headquarters, and planning attacks on the United States. And of course, those attacks occurred. In 1998, on the same day, truck bombs were set off in 2 American embassies in East Africa, Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. In 2000, they attacked the USS Cole, tied up in Yemen, killed 17 sailors, and we began to flesh out that a major attack on the United States homeland was being planned. And then information was provided to the president, but we didn't know exactly when or where. And on 9/11, of course, we found out. At that point, all of the contacts that had been established and maintained with the Northern Alliance and others in Afghanistan as a foreign intelligence collection could be flipped over and turned into a covert action supported main opposition and attack on the Taliban. And that's what we did. So the two streams came together. Foreign intelligence rolled over into covert action. We used all that foreign intelligence. We mounted a campaign against the Taliban, and that campaign consisted of first a team headed up by an officer who had been in charge of the foreign intelligence collection and had a personal relationship with the charismatic leader of the Northern Alliance, Shah Ahmad Massoud, and his deputy, Mohammed Khalili, which was important because Massoud was assassinated 2 days before 9/11. But he led the first team that went in, and it went into the little bit of Afghanistan that the Taliban didn't control, the Panjshir Valley. After that, 6 more teams went in true OSS fashion, spies and saboteurs, intelligence collectors and paramilitary officers behind Taliban lines. That takes a lot of courage, believe me. And the first one of those teams was headed up by my colleague and good friend, seated right there at the table, J.R. Seeger. And he is going to tell you about that experience now. So I hope this has been useful in setting the stage and helping you understand who we are, what we do, and why, and how it works on your behalf, because at the end of the day, we are your CIA. So. Thank you. Now the entertainment portion of tonight's programming.
Okay. So I've been following Rod around for about 30 years now. And, you know, generally speaking, he's always polite and always has a plan. And then I'm left with taking that plan and turning it into something. So I'm hoping that before the night's over that I've done that job. Is that, everybody hear me? Or should I raise this thing?
A little better, please. Just get closer. Just get closer to the mic.
Okay. So because this is, Rod's giving you sort of the CIA perspective, but I want to do something a little different on this. I mean, you're still going to get what he promised. But I want to talk about this within the context of a case study for irregular warfare, because irregular warfare is something that the CIA and the U.S. military did all along in Cold War version 1.0, and you can pretty much count on the fact that we'll be doing it in Cold War 2.0, which we're already in. So next slide, please. So, you know, it's important to have just a simple definition. I'm not going to do a whole lot of education here, and I'm not going to read that slide because you can all read it. But basically, what it demands more than anything else is patience and a long-term commitment to the target set. Okay, you can't do this stuff. This isn't like you release a Tomahawk land attack missile and the job is done. It isn't that and it's not a raid. I mean, irregular warfare, if it's going to be successful, takes time, and that's important for you to understand, because as citizens, often you're going to read about stuff and you're going to wonder, how in the world did these people do this? Or the reverse is also possible. You'd be saying, why in the world are those people still in those places? Right now, I don't have any kind of direct access, but I would tell you right now, I am certain there are people who were just like me in forgotten places doing exactly what I did for a better part of 20 years, which is running cases in places that are nasty. I have a T-shirt that says, you know, adventures in the nastiest places on earth, and nobody cares about what they're doing really in Washington D.C. I mean, that's not to say that people are rude to us, but there's a lot of really important stuff that folks in Washington D.C. have to focus on. It's the job of the CIA to focus on those places that nobody really understands yet. And we hope, in most cases, that nothing terrible is going to happen. But if it does, we're already there. Go ahead. So this is my military thing, right? Bluff, bottom line up front. So this also allows you then, for those of you who are at the point now where you want to go get a drink or need the bathroom, if you look at this slide, you'll know everything that I'm going to say from here on out. So it relieves you from from feeling that you're going to miss out. Also, I should have said up front, since I'm not going to be worried if, I mean, I'm up here and the doors are back there. I'm not going to be worried if you start to fade out on me. I started my federal career as a PFC, so I've had professionals try to make me cry. So, you're not going to do anything to me. Anyhow, the point is that our successes in the fall of 2001 were really for 4 reasons, right? There was already an established Afghan resistance. There was 2 decades of CIA involvement with those guys that before 9/11. I mean, we started in 1980, and so in 2001 we had a little over 2 decades of work with them. The third bullet is we had well-trained and well-equipped U.S. Special Forces, uniformed guys who came in shortly after we arrived and were able to put steel on target. because at the end of the day, there's only so much subversion you can do. And then you got to, if subversion doesn't work, you've got to convince people in, let's say, a kinetic method. And then the third part of Steel on Target, of course, was modern air power, because Afghanistan is a big place, about the size of Texas, and it's a landlocked place, and it's a long ways away from anywhere. It's exactly 12 hours away from the east coast of the United States, makes it 14 hours from here, as far as time zones go. And so if you don't have air power, it's going to be pretty hard to haul all the kinds of weapons you need to convince your adversaries to stop doing what they're doing. Okay, so we're going to talk about the adversaries for a sec. All right, Afghanistan. To this day, it is a state but not a nation. People need to understand that. You look at National Geographic maps and it says it has this border of Afghanistan, and you're like, well, okay, they got a flag and they got a border, must be a nation. They're a state, they have a capital, but they're not a nation. It's a country made up of lots and lots of different ethnic groups, most of whom do not speak the same language. And many of them do not share the same religion. They are all Muslim, but there is about as many sects of Islam in Afghanistan as you can name in, I've done a little bit of, work on Islamic countries for years and years. There's just a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions about what religion's all about. The ethnic groups, there's two different kinds of Pashtuns in the country. They're primarily south of the Hindu Kush. Then you've got Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazara, which are the Shia, Turkmen, and then you've got nomads who come through who are referred to as a pejorative, or referred to as Kuchis. And so you got a lot of different kind of people, none of whom get along. Another part of this, and of course you're reading it already, but there's no main roads in the darn country. You cannot, and during any part of the year, you cannot drive straight from Kandahar to Mazar-i-Sharif at the northern, so from the southern part of the country to the northern part of the country, there's no roads that are passable. And there were certainly no roads in 2001. And then it's divided north and south by the Hindu Kush. So we'll take a look at the couple of pictures here. I guess you probably figured this out. It's dry there. I currently live in New Mexico. We're lucky if we get between 6 and 8 inches of rain a year. That counting our, precipitation actually, that counting our snow. Afghanistan gets between 2 and 4 inches of rain in the whole country. So it's dry. It's dry land farming and not a lot of farming in a lot of places. It's also, it's an impoverished country. It's got, as Rod said, it was the home of bin Laden and his nasties. And they were building training camps all across the country to do their best to build what they thought was two different things. They were going to fight the near enemy being all of the Muslim countries that didn't believe in the extremist position of bin Laden, and the far enemy, which was us and the Western Europeans. So with those training camps, and you might say, well, like, do they have, how do they, if it's a poor country, what's going on there? Well, one of the things that was going on was that the Pakistani intelligence service was collaborating with the extremists because they were training extremists in northern Pakistan to attack the Indians. So now, that wasn't stated and probably wasn't a official Pakistan government policy, but in the shadow world of third world intelligence services, often they make, intelligence services make their own decisions about their own, what they think the country needs, whether the government realizes it or not. One more picture here. We'll just do that's the Hindu Kush. It's hard to get over. That's taken. I took that picture flying over in a Twin Otter. We were at maximum altitude in that Otter to try and get over the top of that stuff. That's by the way, that's spring in the Hindu Kush, just in case you're interested. All right. So next slide. So 9/11 triggered the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. The U.S. government did everything it could to avoid conflict. They actually, at every possible diplomatic way, at the embassy in Islamabad and the embassy in the surrounding states, in the Arab country embassies, we reached out and said, just give them up. It's all you got to do, and it's all good. I mean, we understand that he was powerful and you weren't necessarily part of the plan. And of course, the Taliban were, well, I guess best way to describe it was they were rude. So of course then President Bush is like, okay, I guess we've done the best we can. So the reason that the CIA was the first outfit that was able to do this is, as I said at the very beginning in my bottom line up front, we'd been doing this for 20 years. We had been going in and out of Afghanistan in 1999 and 2000. Small teams. I met Massoud myself in 1999. We didn't expect 9/11 per se, but we expected bin Laden to attack us someplace. For those of you who are of like my age, and remember the age of steam, but there was this great threat that we all thought was going to happen in 2000. It was called the Millennium Threat, when our computers were going to fail, our cars weren't going to work, atonal music was the only thing that was going to play on the radio, all that kind of stuff. Well, of course, that's when we went into Afghanistan thinking that's when he was going to take advantage of that chaos. Well, of course, the chaos didn't happen, and we were happy with that. Next slide, please. So the first team was called Jawbreaker. They were made up, as Rod said, of a composite team of paramilitary officers and Gary Schroen. Gary Schroen just died a couple of years ago. He's a very close friend of mine. He was my boss. He ran Kabul Station in exile out of Islamabad, and then ran Kabul Station when we had a station there, and then ended up as COS in Islamabad too. So he knew, by the way, he had also been one of the last CIA case officers in Iran before 1979. So he'd been doing Persian speakers for a very long time, and he was running it. He was the job of Jawbreaker was to get into the Northern Alliance, tell them that America was on their side, that resources were on their way, and they needed to hold out because they had had this catastrophic event happen where the only real charismatic leader in Afghanistan, Ahmad Shah Massoud, had been assassinated by bin Laden. So that was their job, and they went in just at the tail end of September. I was stuck on the West Coast when 9/11 happened and couldn't get to Washington, anywhere near, because as some of you remember, there were no flights. And driving across the country didn't seem to make any sense because I was working with the FBI at the time out in California. So by the time I got to Washington, I had expected to go out with Gary Schroen. I mean, that was what I thought. And I mean, everybody in these kinds of conflicts, everybody wants to go in, I mean, you want to do something. You want to do your part. I had a little sad face when I found out that they were already gone. And they pointed me down into the basement where we had set up a task force and picnic tables and computers and wires all over the floor and everything else. And I was like, but don't you worry, they told me. You're going to get there. Well, what I didn't know is that I was going to be on Alpha Team. And Alpha Team, you could hit the next one. So you can tell the difference between the Army pilots for the 160th Special Operations Regiment from my team, because we're the ones that look like bikers with Kalashnikovs. So we assembled the team, and I was told by Director Tennant, it was real simple. I had 8 guys. I had 3 resistance groups that didn't get along, and 5 provinces of northern Afghanistan. And basically he said, all right, in that area and that mission set, I want you to destroy the Taliban and capture and kill any Al-Qaeda you can find. Got it? Yes, sir. And as he was walking away, he said, and let us know what you need when you get there. So the thing about these guys, the thing about doing resistance, period, is working with the resistance is, and this is the teeny tiny history lesson. When you're working with resistance groups, they don't ever get along. I mean, it depends on how many resistance groups you got. If you've got 3 resistance groups, you got at least 3 different battlefields that are going on separate from the one that you want them to fight. So my job and my team's job was to convince 3 guys. One was a Tajik, one was an Uzbek, and one was a Hazara Shia, to work together. Well, let's put they didn't have to collaborate, but they had to work towards a common goal, which was destroy the Taliban. And so on the night of the 16th of October, we loaded up in Blackhawks and flew into Afghanistan. It was quite an amazing sort of thing. I have to admit, I didn't realize what the range of the Blackhawks were, so we had 2 Blackhawks, 2 MC-130 fueling birds, then a large command and control bird above that, and then fighters above that, getting us into Afghanistan. It was a big hoorah. I didn't know that, except I was listening on the headphones in the aircraft, and I heard all these voices that were not the pilots talking to the pilots, encouraging them to succeed. Well, of course, the next slide, please. The important point here is that it sounds great, but you can't tell the locals, you can't order the locals around, right? You just can't. Well, you can, but they won't pay any attention to you. So this is something that T.E. Lawrence, as in Lawrence of Arabia, said, all the way back in 1917. It's like, don't try to do too much with your own hands. It's their fight. Well, I'm not going to read it to you, but at the end of the day, it's their fight. And if they can't or won't do it, then you don't need to be there, because you're not going to be able to do anything about it. And by the way, and this last piece is really pretty important for anybody who's ever going to be with resistance. He says, oh, and by the way, you may think your ideas are better than theirs, but you know what? Probably not. So that was his view, and that's how I worked with it for all that time. So the operation is called the Darya Suf operation, basically. We were dropped about 160 kilometers behind, both behind enemy lines to the east, to the west of the lines, as well as 160 kilometers south of Mazar-i-Sharif, which was our target city. And we had to work our way up, initially on horseback, going from the insertion point through the Darya Suf. Darya Suf, very prosaic, it means the river of caves. And since it's dry, that's all there were up there was caves. And through Chapchal, Shulgara, and then eventually Mazar-i-Sharif. We were inserted on the 16th, night of the 16th, 17th of October. Our Special Forces colleagues arrived and connected with us on the 20th of October, and on the 10th of November, we rolled into unopposed rolled into Mazar-i-Sharif. Next slide, please. Oh, go back one for just a sec. This was one of the first slides, first pictures that actually made it back to CIA headquarters. And my wife at the time was working in headquarters on the project, and she saw this image sort of slowly materialize on the screen, and she said, "Oh, there's JR," and her colleague said, "How can you tell?" And she said, "I would know the south side of JR going north anywhere on the planet." So that's my knot with the boonie cap on. Go ahead, next slide. So these are the Special Forces guys. Many of them had never ridden on horses before. They always smiled when it started. That's actually not a Green Beret. That's a special U.S. Air Force Special Tactics Squadron NCO who, remember we talked about steel on target. We needed to be able to do that. Basically, the campaign, for all intents and purposes, was three parts, right? It was lasers, horses, and money. My job, other than keeping the guys collaborating, my job and the team and my team's job was mostly to use funds to undermine, to subvert the Taliban. Because the Taliban up in that part of the country, they weren't like extremist crazy men. They were just kids with guns. The Taliban from the south came up and offered these guys they were dirt farmers, and said, "Here you go, you can have a Kalashnikov, a Toyota Hilux, a small paycheck, and you can terrorize anybody you want." Well, you know, I mean, punks with guns, that's a pretty tempting thing for a kid who has no education and certainly doesn't like the idea of being a dirt farmer. So we used funds, our money, to buy them off. And by golly, it was pretty easy to do that because they didn't want, well, let me just start with, when the Taliban hired them and gave them the guns and the Toyota Hilux, they were pretty excited about doing the killing. They were really not excited about doing the dying. And so once they realized that there was a choice, which was a financial benefit to them or die, they flipped pretty quickly. And meanwhile, of course, how do you do that? Well, you do that through, how do you deliver the kinetic side of that? You use a laser designator, which the Special Forces guys and that Special Tactics Squadron guy had. And then you had the United States Air Force and the United States Navy aviation assets, Marine Corps as well, coming in and delivering steel on target. Well, the Taliban were more than willing to, the southern Taliban were more than willing to run away and leave their guys behind. Go ahead. So this is 10 November in Mazar-i-Sharif. These are the three guys. So to the top left is a guy, a Tajik named Muhammad Atta. To the center is Abdul Rashid Dostam, and to his left, to the right side of the screen, is Muhammad Mohakek, who was the Hazara leader. And they're still, all three of them, God bless them, are all still alive, which is hard to imagine in Afghanistan. They're all, pretty old for Afghanistan. I'm not saying that they're, Dostam's my age, so anyhow. So 10 November comes, we roll into Mazar-i-Sharif. It's like the liberation of Paris. I mean, absolutely, except no champagne and no women. But other than that, it was just like the liberation of Paris. And from that first part of the month, we pretty much were doing nothing much more than stabilization operations and trying to ferret out the last few guys who had been Taliban levies, had been the young kids with punks. The Taliban had retreated to a town to the east, and they were now getting pinched. They had the Northern Alliance coming at them from the east, and we were coming from the west. And in mid-November, the Taliban leader there, a guy named Mullah Fazl, snuck through the lines, came up to Dostamanata and said, you know, all I want to do is go home. You know, if you're willing to take our surrender, that's all good, and just get us home. However, if you don't take our surrender, then you're going to have to fight house to house, and you two guys who want to be future politicians will be labeled the guys who destroyed the city of Kunduz. What do you think? Well, of course, these guys, I mean, at this point, the two Afghan leaders, they really believed him, because in Afghanistan, there's sort of a cultural rule that if you say, I surrender, you're obligated to let them go. Well, it was a false surrender, and it was designed to kill us all, basically. It was designed to kill the three leaders and designed to kill all the Americans on the location. And it was three different small fights. And I'll tell you right up front, I'm standing here today talking to you because I was in two of those small fronts. Started in Kunduz and then drove to Mazar-e-Sharif. Go ahead and give me the next slide. To this place which is called Kalai-Jangi, which just means the house or fort of war. It's a big old dirt fort that was put together in the 19th century. And so I was first in Kunduz and then drove back in the middle of the fight in Mazar-e-Sharif. The only reason I'm here today is because of the United States Air Force, AC-130 gunships. People ask me on a regular basis, they see the pictures of us gunned up and all that stuff, say, well, what did you think? I was like, I thought it was pretty good to have an AC-130 gunship on the phone. I would just tell you right up front. Because that was like, I'm not going to try and be, well, I'm going to be blunt about it. It's the wrath of God. You know, an AC-130 gunship, we were talking to them, and the pilots go, or the gunner goes, yeah, I can see them all there. And they were like, well, it's dark. Can you take care of them? Oh yeah, just give us a second here. And all of a sudden, this blast from the sky shows up, and job complete. Well, it's, you know, next slide. It's not without cost. This is a picture of my friend and colleague Mike Spann. Mike was an Anglico in the Marine Corps before he joined the CIA and went into Rod's paramilitary shop. He was a very young man. Had already had 2 kids, and with his second wife, he had another child there, and his hope was to get home and see them. And he didn't make it. For those of you who, there's plenty of veterans in here, there's a randomness factor in combat. Some folks who are really, really good don't make it home, and some folks who are dopes like me do. And, you know, there's nothing you can do about that, really. It's like, you know, a random number generator, and the generator shows up. But honestly, Mike died shortly before I was about to be ambushed, and so his loss saved myself and a good chunk of the American contingent, plus the two leaders that were in Kunduz, because the Taliban in Mazar-e-Sharif kicked off the ambush too soon. No watches, you know, and they were supposed to all do it all at once, but since they didn't, one kicked off before the other. We knew, because we had communications, that the fight was on. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Remember remember what I said up front, which is the only reason that this is a story of some success is because of the full partnership between our resistance colleagues, the United States military, and the CIA. And that's what makes irregular warfare work, plus a little bit of patience. Thank you. I really wanted to go away, but I guess I can't.
We caught him on the way out.
I'm going to move this thing forward a little bit. I think it's... So guys, thank you so much. I think you've given us a look at the workings of the most secretive government agency that very few people have. Well done. Let's give them another round of applause. Okay, just a couple of admin things. I think we're going to go tonight, probably shoot for about 7:15 on the Q&A. That'll give us about 30 minutes, so we'll have a good time for that. At the end, we want to get some pictures, so Scott's going to, in his closing remarks, is going to ask all the cadets to assemble over here. Please do that, get organized by group, so when we're done, we can get you up here, get a good picture of our speakers, and so give us, the rest of the audience, give us just a few minutes to get those pictures, and then we'll turn you loose on our speakers. So I'm going to kick off the first question, and we talked about this last night a little bit, and I want to get it out. We've got a number, 30, 35 cadets here. A number of those have said over time, you know, I'd really like to get into the intel business. Sounds interesting, sounds exciting. Can you all give some perspective on what they should be thinking about or the things they can do to prepare? What's a young person in their teens look like going into that business? Yep.
We can't hear you.
I'm saying I'm not technically oriented and couldn't turn this thing on. How are you doing now?
Still can't hear you.
Try the other one.
11 third grade. Trade, you want to stand up and take the microphone.
Testing. Testing.
All right, thank you. We spent a lot of time talking about the answer to this question. Is this working?
No, put it close to your mouth, please, also.
We spend a lot of time, how's that?
Better.
Hello? We spend a lot of time talking about the answer to this question because we get this question quite often. I'll switch with you. How's that? Oh, that's great. All right. I would tell young people who are starting out, looking at their professional development, in your case, I think getting ready for college and not too far off, a course of study that shows an interest in world affairs, in politics, and I mean a real interest, develop at least one language and at least show the ability to learn language. And then when you have the opportunity on graduation from college, either find a position that where an employer puts you in a foreign field and you can demonstrate your ability to function ably and effectively and happily in a foreign culture and be comfortable with people other than Americans, and be an extroverted, happy person in that role. That's the very, very basic job. And I would add for you, Navy cadets, Sea cadets, don't forget there are two branches of the Naval Service of the United States. That's all I'm going to say as a former Marine.
Does this work or not? No? Throw that out. Okay. The only other thing I would say is it doesn't matter. Often people ask me, well, what should I study? Well, you know, I can say to you right up front, it doesn't matter. If you're an engineer, a physicist, you know, I was a liberal arts major. I'm an anthropologist and archaeologist by training. So it doesn't matter what your absolute college degree is. Just do it well. Show passion. focus on school. That's because it's going to be, it isn't like you have to have a 4.0, but you have to be at least proficient at what you decided to study, because that's the thing that's going to serve as your foundation when you finally get going.
Does this work at all? I always thought that our techs, we had a director of science and technology who developed technical things for us, and some of them were pretty amazing. But I always thought the motto of their shop should be, well, it worked in the lab, this might be one of those products. I'm going to take a little bit of issue with JR, only because we're offering each of us our own opinion. I would tell, if you were my son, daughter, nephew, niece, or friend, it can make a difference what you study. If one of you is a English major and one is a political science major with an emphasis on Near Eastern affairs, the second person is going to have a better shot at it, in my experience. And even though I know you're going to have a program on manpower in the military, and we talked about this last night, and the crisis confronting our military and attracting talented young people in our current society, we don't have that problem. At least we didn't in my day. I don't know about you. There are a lot of people who want to join the Central Intelligence Agency. There's a pretty good competition to get in, so you got to have your act together and be ready. And I can't stress enough the demonstrated interest in world affairs and knowledge of world affairs. Be able to answer the question, pick a world issue. In an interview, for example, you might be asked, just pick a world issue. Tell me your views on China and Taiwan. And be ready to answer that question knowledgeably. I mean, do your homework. And a language is, I think, critical because we have to operate in a foreign language in the field. And even if you get an asset or a target for recruitment who speaks even pretty good English, when you get right down to it, when I need to know your hopes, your dreams, your grievances, whatever it is that motivates you, I have to use that to recruit you. And I can't get to know you in your innermost workings if I can't speak your native language, because there are certain concepts that are represented only by a certain word in a certain language that your target speaks. And you got to be able to close the deal often. You got to be able to use the right native word. Sorry, that's the nature of our business. And in case I don't get the opportunity to do it later, I want to add to JR's presentation. I knew Mike Spann, and I remember saying goodbye to him before he left. He was the first American to die in Afghanistan, but the nature of our work was such that my paramilitary officers, the first American to die in Somalia was a paramilitary officer, Larry Friedman. And that's one of the reasons people working the corridors of European capitals referred to our guys as knuckle draggers. Well, they were proud of the title, and I was too.
Does this work? Yeah, there we go.
Test, test.
Okay. Testing. Hey, we got 3. How about that?
Why don't you go out there if we're going to talk?
I think everybody remembers where they were on 9/11. I wonder if you could just describe a little bit what the atmosphere was around the building. Rod, you were there, and JR, you were trying to get back. Can you talk about what went on and what the emotions were and what the focus of activity was?
Well, mine's pretty quick because I was working with the FBI in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, we were working on a variety of different other kinds of counterterrorism stuff, related in the sense that everybody in the intelligence community understood that the threat was from Al-Qaeda. So we were trying to figure out how, where, when, all that. The FBI is, when it comes to a project like this, the FBI will throw every person at it. By the time I was driving up to San Francisco with my wife, who's also an intel officer, And by the time I got to the FBI building that same day, they'd already set up a task force that was about the size of this area. So there was a lot of work to be done right away. You know, that was everybody wanted to be part of the fight.
In my case, I hope you will remember, the one thing I ask you to remember about my presentation is that we in the Covert Action side of the House could not do anything without presidential directive, and I mean everything. So that what we call the infrastructure, the equipment, the personnel, the supplies, everything, I had to have explicit authorization. I couldn't buy a bean, a bandage, or a bullet without presidential authorization. And one of the things that I was charged with by the President was coordinating our special operations capability with the military special operations capability. And I take great pride in the picture that JR showed you of Alpha Team, half soldiers, half CIA. Because that is evidence, I think, of the success of all the people who worked hard in overcoming any rivalry or mistrust. And there was a good deal of that post-Vietnam. And so in pursuit of that goal, on 9/11, I was in the office of Air Force General Charles Holland, commander of United States SOCOM, talking about our guys working together and what more we needed in the way of confidence building and trust, because the way things unfolded and were likely to unfold and did unfold in JR's case was our guys were going to go in first, and the military had to have confidence that they knew what they were doing, they could be relied on, and that when the fires were lit around the landing zone, the guys who lit them were Americans who were signaling it's okay to come ahead. And no matter how much you practice, when it's real, it's a real test of how well we had built trust between us, and I'm proud to say that I was down in Tampa trying to do just that, and I think this was the best example I know of that concept really working.
Okay, I've got one more question here for a question card, and then Bob, wherever you are, I'll give this mic back to you, and we can start doing questions from the audience.
You don't need a microphone.
He's bringing the microphone to somebody.
So, you may not know any more about this than anybody who reads the paper, but any perspectives on the way that Afghanistan is shaping up now under the Taliban? Do you think any predictions about the long-range future of the country? Do you think they've got the capacity to govern?
Well, no, I mean, first of all, again, the problem you face with this is that, remember I told you, there's in my presentation, it's not a nation. And so the current managers who are running the government in Kabul, they are simply caretakers for the guys who are still living in Kandahar. They're southern Afghans. They don't agree with anything that anybody in northern Afghanistan thinks, says, or does. So, I mean, and that doesn't mean that there's a resistance, a large-scale resistance in the north, but what it means is it's going to be real hard for these extremists to ever really mobilize and create something resembling a government. So it's not, sadly, it's going to get worse. I have only, done this since 1985, so I'm not going to try and say that I know what I'm talking about, but I've done it for a while, and Afghans are a cantankerous bunch. I mean, they naturally don't get along with each other very much, and they certainly don't get along across the ethnic lines. So what you end up with is you end up with the Taliban who are willing to chop some heads off, but that does not mean that they're ever going to successfully govern the country. That's just my 2 cents, and that's not, I've been out for a long, long time, but I've stayed current in the academic side of the house, and it's pretty clear it ain't going to get any better, and it's going to probably get a whole lot worse.
Great, thanks.
Question over here.
Yep.
So I met you guys last night. 11 months after 9/11, I was at 3 in the morning. I was sitting in the Kadena main bank issuing a couple $100,000 of cash to our first of the first Special Forces who was going away to the Philippines to do their thing. What type of money did you pay them, and how hard was it for you to get the money in your hot little hands?
Well, I gave them $100 bills. Let's start with that. And you know, the thing is, that's part of what, I mean, when I said, you know, in my presentation, right, lasers, horses, and money, there's part of what the CIA can do pretty quickly is produce and then authorize the expense of funds. My bag going into Afghanistan, I had just had one bag, one duffel. It had one change of clothes in it. That's not to count my rucksack, which had the weapons and ammunition, all that stuff, but medical gear. Had one set of clothes in it and $1.5 million in the bag. It was a big green bag. Everywhere we went, my guys were like, "Hey, boss, where's the bag?" You know, 'cause none of us wanted to have to explain to Rod Smith that we lost $1.5 million. And when the night of, so I mean, the answer is the CIA. Where did it come from? I have not a clue. I mean, you know, it came. I mean, I know where I know I signed for it, but I mean, where the agency got $1.5 million in $100 bills in that short a time period, Rod might know. It didn't come out of his checkbook. I know that for a fact.
In addition to what JR took, the NALT team that went in first in the non-Taliban controlled area, the very first team with Gary Schroen, they were equipped with a Pelican case with $3 million in it, and that cut a lot of ice with the Northern Alliance. And in addition to money gets a lot of attention, but one of the things that our division was charged with and that I took special pride in was maintaining the stocks that we had amassed in weapons and equipment against who knew what. You know, it was a matter of our best guess. But our division, and I had a hand in this, I think we were the only people in the United States government, because the Department of Defense wasn't authorized to do it. I had 14,000 AKM rifles ready to go. Each one purchased, inspected, disassembled, inspected, reassembled, fired, disassembled, cleaned, reassembled, and sealed in a foil envelope individually with 4 magazines in a sling. So you could hand it to an indigenous fighter. Right there's your rifle. And where the money and the equipment came from was authorized funds that were set aside for a rainy day, and we had one.
General, we have a question from this cadet, that cadet, and this cadet over here. You're third cadet, so you're first.
Good evening. I had a question on technologies. I was born in 2006, and I've grown up in a world of pretty advanced technology, from artificial intelligence, integrated satellite networks, and a very advanced drone fleet. I believe that the IC likely has taken a hold at the front end of these technologies, but want to ask you, how do these advancements affect the scope of intelligence collecting, and could you categorize some usages of technology in your experience in Afghanistan?
Okay. Remember, I'm a liberal arts major. First thing I'm going to point you to, 2 weeks ago, The Economist had a 20-page special edition on the role of advanced intelligence or the role of advanced technologies, both for and against intelligence operations. So, you know, if you want to know where it's going, that's about as good a place as any. From my perspective, it was an easy read. So A couple of things. At the end of the day, technology, particularly what the economists called ubiquitous technical surveillance, makes espionage pretty darn hard. But any machine that is going to do that kind of stuff can be perverted. It can be manipulated, and if I recruit somebody who's a coder, which I'm not going to do by electronics, I'm going to have to look at them face to face. I can write, well, it's called malicious code, but of course it would be for our side, so we would think of it as a positive thing. So that's the part of the deal. In the world of events like 9/11, you have to remember that lots of stuff in the next conflict isn't going to work. We're already seeing in the Ukraine, on the Ukraine battlefield, that both sides are spoofing GPS. So if you get rid of GPS, I just hate to tell you this, it's map and compass, right? Which is okay by me, but maybe not so good for somebody who's been used to using their cell phone to navigate.
Let me just add, I'm even more of a Luddite than JR, which is saying something, but I am proud of the fact that for all the technology that's being developed daily at an almost exponential rate, the fact remains that no matter how much overhead we have, no matter how much ability we have to penetrate cyberspace and all the advances that are being made, still in today's world, there are meetings between the head of state and his two closest advisors where they talk about what their plans and intentions really are. And they're going to be doing that in a place where we may not have technology that can penetrate, not yet anyway. And that is the art of human intelligence. We have to recruit one of the people who was present to tell us what happened in that meeting. And that's going to be true for as long as I can foresee. And it has been true forever. It was the original form of intelligence collection. And I know there are many churchgoers in this room, I expect, being in Central Texas. You remember that when Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, the first thing he did was send into Jericho 2 spies. And they were to seek out the strength of the defenses of the city from human sources. So they didn't have satellites and AI. But they were found out and pursued inside Jericho, and they took refuge with a woman, I used to know her name, I can't remember. And she was a practitioner of the world's second oldest profession. And it is the only recorded instance of case officers being caught in such an establishment. But she and her family alone were spared when Joshua killed every living thing in the city, man, woman, child, and animal. And that's how far back we go. And I think the fact of the need for collection from human to human is not going to go away. That's answer number one. The second part of the answer is it Trevor? Well, Trevor, if you were going to go for an interview tomorrow, I'd say you're well prepared. Go in and tell that interviewer, I am concerned about those things that you said that I can't even repeat. Seriously. Because the fact that you are prepared, that you've thought about it, you know what you're talking about, that's the kind of thing that's going to advance your interests.
We have one last question over here from Cadet, my squadron over here. You're next.
How hard was it for you to navigate the terrain when you were on the ground in Afghanistan?
I did have a map. I mean, seriously, it was hard. Of course it was hard. Now, remember, I'm working with guys who live there. So, it was, what they did was they gave me, a horse, and they said, follow me, we're going to our headquarters. Now, obviously, I wanted to follow where we were on a map, too, because I might want to run away. So, you know, there's an awful lot of awful lot in Afghanistan. Just like there's an awful lot of Texas, there's an awful lot of Afghanistan that's never really been mapped or anything. So we weren't on roads, we were on horse trails mostly when we were behind the lines because the Taliban had the roads, right? So we're sneaking around in the mountains where the Taliban wouldn't come, so we didn't have to sneak very hard, but we stayed away from the roads. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Okay.
Okay. Any more from the audience? I'll take one more. Yes, Scott, go ahead.
One of the things that I always like to ask when we wrap things up here, I did it for 30 years as a news anchor, as a sports anchor. I always wanted to know, what's the takeaway? All these people in here have heard you talk about pre-9/11, post-9/11, just what's going on in our world for decades. Where we're all sitting at home, listening on TV, watching on TV, reading our newspapers, whatever it might have been, and of course now on our telephones. What is the thing that you're going to be most concerned about? It's a crazy world we all live in, certainly not the one I grew up in. And I just wondered what we should be concerned about. With all the knowledge that you have, when you rest your head on that pillow tonight, what are the things that you're concerned about, that we should be concerned about, that we should fear, that we should prepare for, that we should get ready to do? All of us in here, all these cadets and all these young men and women that have made the great commitment to be a member of our military. What should we walk out of here and tell our family and friends about what we need to watch out for, be prepared for, and just get ready to be a part of?
I'm going to take the first stab at this. I mean, I think that it's important for folks to realize there's always going to be adversaries against the United States of America. It's just the nature of the fact that we are a powerful people, a powerful country, we have a great economy, and there are going to be people who want to undermine that. So it took us from, about 1945 until 1991 to defeat the USSR. And we did that because we were patient, we were committed, and we understood that it isn't going to be fixed in a day. So I would say that the most important thing I would recommend to anybody out here is to remember that there are bad guys out there. There's lots of different kinds of bad guys, and we're going to have to confront them, but it isn't like in the movies or in TV shows where it's done in 60 minutes. It's not done in a week, it's not done in a month. If you think about it a second, 1945 to 1991 was how long the American people took up the challenge, put their shoulder to the wheel, and confronted the Soviet Union. We may very well, and for our Sea Cadets and our Civil Air Patrolmen and anybody else out there, you may very well. When I joined the CIA, I had no thought that the Soviet Union was going to go away. I didn't realize. I mean, I really truly thought that my whole life would be involved with the Soviet Union. Didn't work out that way, but it was only because of multiple generations before me who'd put their shoulder to the wheel.
I would just add, first, if you will take the time to seriously keep yourself informed on the issues. I mean, you could make a list of China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, whatever's in the news. But I'm glad that all of you cadets are here because you are the future. And I believe that one of the threats that you already are facing and will continue to face, and it is very, very dangerous to our society. If someone had told me 25 years ago that in the year 2024, I would have all the facts known to man at my fingertips if I knew how to do a search, I would have thought, that's amazing. That would be incredible. Well, we have it. And it turns out that it's eminently corruptible, and that it has not resulted in us being smarter or wiser or more perceptive. In fact, what it's caused us to do is retreat into silos of our preference and be seduced by confirmation bias, be seduced by disinformation. So if there's one thing the future is you cadets. And I want to tell you what I told my two children, who are older than you are, but there came a time when I felt obliged to say to them, and my son did 2 deployments in Afghanistan as a Marine infantry officer, I'm sorry about the mess you're inheriting. You don't know how bad it would be if we hadn't done our best. It could be a lot worse. But one threat right in your face right now is the misuse of the technology that we have developed, the pervasive influence of disinformation, of misinformation. I guarantee you that the Russians are actively right now pumping information into the internet, on Facebook, whatever platform they choose, to confuse and divide us. And if whatever you can do to develop the critical thinking you will need to figure out what's true and what's not is going to be of enormous value. I hope somebody in the room remembers that I began this evening by saying we are a country that values honesty. Well, we're going to need to be a country that can recognize honesty and the truth when we see it and not be misled.
Ron, JR, thank you, number one, for coming a long way to be with us tonight. Thanks for your candor and insights. I think it's a message that went out to the whole audience, and particularly our young folks, is hopefully one that remembers and valuable, so we appreciate it. With that, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Scott to wrap us up.